Morning, everyone. Happy fall. My name is Eric Esteves, and I'm the Executive Director of the Lenny Zakin Fund. And just want to welcome all of you to our first seminar of the fall on fundraising, featuring our guest speaker, Dominique Calix, who is at the YW Boston. Dominique has joined us before for a previous seminar on fundraising and has graciously decided and agreed to join us again. We have some new folks here who weren't here the last time around or weren't here last year. So we hope you find this workshop informative. She is a wealth of information and resource. So make sure you ask a ton of questions, but also there'll be a separate, kind of section for questions and answers. We also have the transcript being displayed, and this is also being recorded in case you need to leave early. We do plan to upload this to our YouTube channel. So you can also subscribe, and then it'll be easy to find if you can't attend the full session. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Dominique.
All right. Well, I'm excited to be here. Let me actually share the screen before I even get started. Time I started a presentation, I was so into it. I was very much so halfway through the presentation and realized that the slides weren't up. So not going to do that this time. So we're going to be talking today about how to develop inclusive fundraising strategies. And I'm really going to base this a lot on my time here at YW Boston and how we go about our fundraising. There'll be points where I talk about how I collaborate with some of the other teams at YW Boston, mainly the communications and marketing team. But that's the gist of my presentation. And because I'm going to be talking at you for some time, I figured I should give you a little bit about myself. And I think that it's great that I would know who's in the room. So feel free to tell me what organization you're from if it's not in your name on Zoom. Most people rename themselves these days. So I'm Dominique Calix. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I currently work at YW Boston as the Associate Director of Annual Giving and Special Events. I also, fun fact, work at Northeastern University as a professor in the nonprofit management program. So I just like talking about fundraising. I talk about fundraising a lot. So please feel free to ask me plenty of questions because it makes me really excited to talk about fundraising. Outside of being a nerd about fundraising, I'm a Boston native. I go hard for the city at all times, even though sometimes, we're a little strange, but I still go hard for the city, especially our sports. So there will be no sports slander. I might talk in sports references. It might happen. I'm just naming it. Football is back. Outside of that, I'm a big foodie, and you probably will see me out and about, and feel free to say hi. I'm a very friendly person. Getting right into it, we're going to talk about inclusive fundraising. And again, a lot of this is going to be how I approach inclusive fundraising at YW Boston. And that's what I'm going to base most of my presentation on today. But also, there would be aspirational things that maybe I haven't gotten to at YW Boston because we're a small team and it could require a larger team. But we will be talking about inclusive fundraising. So I have a question for you all, and I would love to see you answer it in the chat. And I'm going to move. Yes, Eric Northeastern, I see your message. But my question for you is, what challenges have you discovered in implementing inclusive fundraising practices? Or if you haven't tried to implement inclusive fundraising practices, what has kind of held you back? I feel like it's good to know that you're amongst your people here who are all trying to do this. I know when we first started thinking about implementing inclusive fundraising practices, a lot of it is, well, this is how the tried and true do it, and this is what we know will work, and why would we shift from that to this when it's not something that we've seen people do and have success with? And I think that's what kind of holds a lot of people back, but there are also other reasons. Maybe your staff is really small. So feel free to put that in the chat. Let's see if anyone wants to share how or you can unmute yourself if you're typing a long answer. I like to make this interactive. I'm gonna give y'all a second. Like I said, there are many reasons. Yes, more capacity. I hear that. I'm a team of 3 right now, and there's just not enough hours in the day for the 3 of us to do that. Board can also be very, like when I said that, I was at an organization before YW and I was like, we should do these things. And again, there was hesitancy because that's not how fundraising is typically done. And if you're just new to fundraising, you're like, well, what? I need to understand like the basics first. And I completely get that. If this is your first go at it, you're not going to want to try and do the super like creative. You want to know what like already works. And we'll talk about a little bit of what already works as well. But I also think that it's a good time to start to think about practices that aren't tried and true to the fundraising world, because it's a very antiquated field. We are very stuck in well, we did this back in the like early 90s. So we could still do it. Or we did this back when fundraising was a thing, when Andrew Carnegie was starting to give out his money, and it works. There's other ways that we can do this. We're in a whole different generation now. So thank you for sharing why you are struggling with implementing practices. I feel for you because I have been there. Okay, so inclusive fundraising, and I'm going to also say communications, because without having inclusive communications, you can't have inclusive fundraising. So a lot of my work ends up being that I am working with the communications team at YW Boston. And maybe you don't have a separate communications team, and that might be part of what is kind of holding you back from doing some of this, because you're doing both communications and fundraising. But it is an opportunity because you are then getting to oversee both, and they go hand in hand. You can't have strong fundraising without strong communications. You can't have inclusive fundraising without inclusive communication. So when it comes to your fundraising strategy and how it directly connects to your communications, you should want to do 3 things. The first being, you want to attract people. And so how are you going to attract people with your communications so that they are going to want to think about think about giving to your organization? Well, there's online content. Online content is going to come from your communications team. So you should be working hand in hand with your communications team, or if you are to your communications team, you should be thinking about what kind of content is going to really push people to think, well, this organization is really innovative and doing things that require a lot of support. And so I'm going to want to make a donation. That could be your newsletter. Maybe you have blog posts in your newsletter, and your blog posts are about things that are happening in the community related to your particular mission. We at YW have our leader that goes out once a month at the end of the month. Sign up for our newsletter if you haven't. There's lots of great things on diversity, equity, inclusion in there. But on top of that, we have posts about if it's, let's say, August is Black Philanthropy Month. We've done posts about Black philanthropy. We've also done posts on small businesses that are Black owned, because August is a very big month for like different things in like different holidays or months and whatnot. So it's Black Philanthropy Month, it's Black Business Month. There are lots of things going on in August. So in August, we talk about what is the angle, which month are we going to be focused on? So maybe we want to reintroduce our small business map because that's going to be relevant to people at that time. Maybe it's we want to put up a blog post about why it's important to talk to a diverse donor base and include that in the leader. That's things that we've done in the past and will continue to do at YW to make sure that we have online content that will attract people and make sure they understand that we are relevant and want to continue to be relevant. In addition to online content like blogs and things of that nature, you're also going to collaborate with your communications people on events and partnerships. The ways that you're going to collaborate include promotion of those events. You need people at the event. So in order to get people at that event, you're going to need promotion, and that comes from your communication and marketing team. And then with partnerships often bring in lots of new donors for organizations. But if no one knows about the partnership, no one's going to be like, oh, you have this partnership. So again, your communications team is going to be vital in making sure that you're able to attract people and build that awareness for your organization. The other thing that you want to do is make sure that you have touch points. And so you want to be able to engage with your community of folks that are already there and the people who are coming in and are new. So you'll collaborate with your communications teams to make sure that there are different touch points that you're having. One thing that we did once we saw a big influx of new donors is we created an email series in collaboration with our communications team, specifically for new donors. So we had new donors coming in, and once you are a new donor in our system, you are set up into this chain of emails. It's a 3-part series where it's kind of like a get to know YW a little bit more. So tell you a little bit about why your gift is so important to us, no matter the size. Then we'll talk a little bit about our different programs in the second email and include links to the different programs or videos about the programs that we have going on. Then in the last email, it's like, well, you're in. How do you want to continue this partnership? How do you want to continue to stay engaged? And we give ways for people to stay engaged, including offering little freebies. We gave out bookmarks and stickers to all of our new donors if they wanted them. So there was a button. If you click that button, I got a notification and I mailed you a bookmark, and I would write a quick thank you, like, thanks for being a part of our YW family. But that couldn't happen, and that engagement couldn't happen without collaboration with our communications team and really thinking about how to make sure that that communication can go on and not be very taxing for our team. Because again, I am a team of 3 at YW, and while for some that might be really big because they're a team of 1, a team of 3 is, we're still strapped for time, and we still have lots that we're trying to do that we can't get to. And so working with communications to make sure that that can go on seamlessly in the background without having to have us, do I admit this person? Sure. Without having to have it strain our team and take us away from other projects. The third thing that you want to make sure that your fundraising and communications is doing is that you want to make sure that you're able to convert people. So you're going to attract them, you're going to engage them. And so maybe they gave a gift one time and they are already in your donor base. Just because they gave a gift one time does not mean they're going to be a habitual donor. And I know, well, for those of you who are new to fundraising, you may not know this, but I personally know that it is a lot more effective to keep your donors than to continually try and acquire new donors. It takes a lot more money to acquire new donors because you don't know what you're going to get, and the return on investment could be nothing. You could put in all this work, you can pay all this money for ads or whatever you're doing to gain new donors, and yet you might not get a new donor. Whereas you have all these people who are already primed and ready to give to YW because they are, or your organization, because they have given before. You want to convert them to a habitual donor. So in doing that, you want to be able to show your impact. You want to be able to steward those relationships. And that's going to take collaboration, again, with communications, or again, if you are your communications and fundraising, your team just has to think about that from both lenses so that it can be truly impactful. But you want to make sure you're thinking about, how are we showing our impact? Maybe there's a social media campaign that is specifically targeted towards your donors. We did a campaign where we featured different donors at different levels. So we had a monthly donor and we asked them why. It was a featured piece, and we asked them why they give to YW. And then we also have our Persimmon Society, which are folks who give over $1,000 or more to YW. And we had someone who was a Persimmon member who was ready to talk about why they give $1,000 to YW each year. And then we had somebody who was on a committee, and we had a board member, and we had a new donor that and we featured all of those folks and talked about their story so that people understand that, like, there are other people out there that are also seeing the impact that YW is making, or seeing the impact that your organization is making. If you take this strategy, feel free to use it as well. And you have people who also see the greatness in your organization, and it converted lots of people. We saw lots of clicks on that donate button, because naturally we would put a donate button at the end of that blog post. We put a donate button at the end of all of our blog posts, but this one was very prominent. I was like, I want it big. I want you to see the donate button. And so we had a lot of clicks on that. So those are the three things that you are really going to be collaborating in terms of thinking about communications and fundraising. If you are a super small shop and you're housed in one office or department, or if you have to reach across and collaborate with a different department, you want to make sure that you're collaborating to attract, engage, and convert folks. So with all that being said, you're probably like, you're talking about inclusive fundraising, but what is it actually? Like, how is it different from regular fundraising? Well, let me tell you. It's the active work of grounding your fundraising practices in equity, anti-racism, justice, so that anyone who's not at your fundraising table feels invited to the table, or can join the table. So oftentimes when you think of fundraising, you're probably thinking old white. Yeah, that's about it. But like, fundraising is different now. There's corporate social responsibility there, where you're talking with corporate partners and they could be a part of the conversation. There are so many different identities. I can rattle them off for a really long time, but all those people are also going to have say in the fundraising conversation. And we need to stop thinking that they shouldn't be a part of the conversation because of very antiquated thinking of where wealth really sits. And wealth has shifted, and everybody should be a part of the fundraising conversation. Even those who don't have a ton of wealth should be a part of the conversation, because there are people within your community that are going to have things to offer to your fundraising conversation that might not have the most dollars to give to you, but they might have the connections that will be really great for your fundraising. And so that's what I think of when I think of inclusive fundraising, bringing back just like everybody into the conversation, as opposed to focusing on those who are super wealthy and affluent, because then you don't have a lot of people in the conversation that can really drive your fundraising in a way that makes people feel included. So with that being said, if you're talking about trying to be more inclusive in your fundraising, you're probably wondering what you should avoid. So let's get into that. The first thing you want to avoid, I think, just in general, but especially if you're trying to center yourself in inclusive fundraising practices and inclusive communication practices, is you want to avoid phrases that center pity towards others. It's just no one feels good about that, and it alienates people. Um, and that's not going to provide a very inclusive environment. I've been in plenty of board meetings in the past where I have sat down and am a part of the staff, and it feels like I am like looking in on something and I'm not a part of the conversation. Um, and there's often language that's used like, well, they need this from us because they don't have anything to give to their community, and this is going to give them the chance to give to their community. I used to work in schools a lot, so the day was children, so it was very triggering for me, being that I often worked in communities that I grew up in. Um, as I said, I am a Boston native, so I was working in like Hyde Park. I was working in Roxbury, and so I was like, well, I'm sitting at this table right now, and I have lots that I can offer and share. Um, I work with you all daily, but yet you're saying that children who grew up in the same neighborhoods I grew up in don't have that. And so don't have that opportunity. And so moving away from language that centers pity is going to really open up the conversation for folks. Let's say you're bringing in folks who live in the communities that you're working with. So they're going to feel a lot more comfortable to have a conversation if they're not in a conversation that's not centering their community in pity. Um, the next thing that you want to avoid, well, before I get into the next thing, these are some of the things that I personally, especially when working at a school, but just in general, I try not to use underprivileged, inner city. Like it just doesn't make people feel great. And so don't use it. At least that's how I feel. But also, you need to think about that for your organization and what are those words. Um, the other thing that I like to avoid when centering myself in inclusive fundraising practices includes avoiding the opportunity for communities to be a stop on a poverty tour. And don't get me wrong, I love having donors and people come in and see um, the site, get a sense of what is going on. But this is a kind of a combination of like doing this in a way that makes sure that you're not, again, centering the community in pity, but also it's not like, well, this is a stop along many stops that I'm going to make today to see the different organizations that I support. And wow, all these organizations really need me. Like I'm not here to stroke your ego. I'm here to do good work. And if you want to do good work and support our good work, then great. We can have that conversation and you can stop by. But if you're coming to visit my site so that I can stroke your ego and say, hey, you're doing such a great job. Look at all the things that you do in this community and you do alongside with other communities. That's not what I'm here for. So one thing I really hate when it comes to like a stop on the poverty tour is how you use your community along as you're having people come into your site. So when I was at a school, I would often hear, well, we should have the students give tours. Yes, sure, we can have the students give tours, but are you having the students give tours and you're making them feel really bad about themselves? Like, oh, you have a stain on your shirt, we need to get a new shirt. Like I have worked at schools where it was like, okay, we have this back stock of uniform that we could change students into in case they're going to give a tour. Let the student be. They are at school. They are bound to get a little dirty. They are bound to have a pen mark on their shirt. I was that kid. I always had pen mark or marker somewhere on me, and I gave tours all the time. You don't need to have this perfect image of what your organization should look like to your donor. You should just have an authentic like representation of your organization. And that includes if you're working at a school, maybe your kids have pen on their shirts. Maybe they just got off of lunch and there is a stain from their delicious food that they had. That happens. It's real, be real, and that's going to make the visit all the better for not only that person, but for the community that you are working with, because they don't feel like they are, a stop on a tour, or, someone's coming and like they're a spectacle for them so that they could just be watched and be like, ooh, look at these people. No, don't do that to them. The other thing that you want to do is avoid stereotyping. I think oftentimes people fall into this, well, we need to talk about the stereotypes of this community because that is going to really drive our point. But that also feels very alienating. So imagine because anytime I had a student give a tour, I was on the tour with them. I wasn't going to like let them off with some strangers and they never met. That would be very strange. Like, oh, just walk around the building with these people you don't know. No, I'm going to be there. And so if I'm going to have conversations while they're giving this tour, I'm not going to be like, well, in this community, there's a lot of gun violence. Like, no, they live here. This is what they know what's going on, and they don't need you to like hyper focus on the fact that this is happening, or these are the things that people say about their community. It's going to make the people who you are partnering with, the community you're working with, feel just icky, and then they're not going to have a good feeling about your organization, and then you're not going to have buy-in from your community, and then because you don't have buy-in from your community, you then won't have a really good impact to show to your donors. So it's just a snowball effect there. So with a lot of these things, it's a snowball effect of, if this happens, then this will happen, and then this will happen, and then you won't have impact to show to your community. And that's just not going to help your fundraising case. You also want to avoid being transactional. Fundraising has always been very transactional, where it's you go in and it's like, well, I'm here to ask you for money today. It's about that time, Bob, like you need to make your gift to YW, or what else? You need to make your gift to the Lenny Zakin Fund so that we can continue to support people. But if that's the only interaction that you have with people, then that's going to make people who can't continually make a gift but can support in other ways feel like they're not really involved in the fundraising conversation. And so then you're going to just kind of block that off, and maybe they have access to corporate social responsibility dollars that could be tremendously great for your organization. We've had people who are on our host committee who are like, we can't make a really big gift, but what we can do is we can go to this organization, and this organization and say, you should sponsor this event. So if you're only focused on this transactional, well, it's time for me to ask Sally for, her $3,000 gift. Someone like Kimmy, who is like, I can go and ask my organization to support this cause, isn't going to feel like they have much say in your fundraising conversation. And so then they're going to go elsewhere probably. And then you also want to avoid being heavily you-centered. And I feel like oftentimes people are like, well, what are you supposed to do? Well, I when I say you shouldn't be heavily you-centered, I'm not saying that you shouldn't talk about the person and how their interaction with your organization is important to the impact of the mission that you're trying to achieve. No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is, you are the only reason why we are able to do this work. No, you're not the only reason why we're able to do this work. And And saying you are the only reason why you were able to do this work, you're probably saying this because they gave you a lot of money. And people are going to see that. And so if you are saying to someone who gave $25,000 a year, you are the only reason why we were able to continue to do this work. Someone who can't give $25,000 is going to be like, well, they can't do this work with what I'm going to give to them. So I'm going to go to another organization that can do the work with what I can give to them. And then that's another person that's not at your fundraising conversation that provides a different lens. So you just want to be really cautious about how you're talking to your donors, and especially how you're talking to your donors. That I think you should just be cautious about how you talk to your donors at all times, but especially in times where other people can see you talking to your donors. You want to be very mindful of what implications it could have to other people who might want to be a part of your fundraising conversation. So again, I said you are the reason for that phrase is like very popular in fundraising. It's the bane of my existence. Anytime I see it, I cringe. It doesn't make me feel good, so I don't like using it. So I'm also, before I get into what not to avoid, I will pause and say, everyone has to go through their fundraising journey differently. And so maybe you can, like, I try and avoid all of those things. Maybe you start off and you can avoid a couple of those things. Moving towards an inclusive fundraising process is a process. It's just that, a process. It's going to take time. You can't just rip the Band-Aid off and be like, I'm going to do it all. It takes time. You're not going to solve your inclusive fundraising worries in one go. So don't be hard on yourself. Give yourself grace as you're going through this process, and you're going to need to test out different things, because again, this is not the tried and true. This is very different for organizations. Organizations are very used to being able to use the phrase, you are the reason, or, have people come in and do the tour and talk in stereotypes, because that's really going to amplify the reason why you should give to their organization. And so that's the tried and true. And like I said before, there's going to be pushback. A lot of you talked about the pushback from boards and things of that nature. That will happen. But you still need to, make the case and try and go through that process. It just won't happen overnight. So give yourself grace. I think fundraisers tend to be very hard on themselves. So that, me being a fundraiser, I tend to be very hard on myself. So I always try and remind folks to give yourself grace. So with that being said, what you should not avoid when trying to be inclusive in your fundraising practices. Intentionality. You should be very intentional. You should think about the language that you're using. You should be thinking about, for that piece that we did where we featured different donors at different levels, we were very intentional, one, about thinking about, we could have just done all of our top donors. We could have said, oh, we're going to bring in all of our top donors from YW and have them featured in the article. Well, that's not really going to move the needle for us. We're not going to attract new monthly donors. We're not going to attract new lower level donors. We're not going to attract mid-level donors. We're only going to attract major donors with that. And maybe that's not even a real guarantee, because major gifts, that's a whole different ball game. Yes, they're going to fall into all the traditional fundraising tactics, but you're not going to put out an article and they're going to see it and be like, yeah, I'm going to give $25,000. You're going to meet with them. They're going to ask you lots of questions. That is a big investment. At that point, they're looking at it of what's in my portfolio. So to go into a conversation, go into that piece and say, we're only going to use our major donors, that wasn't going to be the most tactful strategy there. So what we did was we had a monthly donor. Like I said, we had donors at different levels, and we were very intentional about that. in addition to being intentional about the donors at different levels, we had donors of different identities. We had a couple. We had a young professional. We had a board member. We had someone who just gives to YW because they really like YW as an organization. We actually had, I think we had two couples, because we had one same-sex couple. We had one, you know, uh, why am I blanking on the word? We had one heterosexual couple. So we had two couples. And so we were just very intentional about who we were featuring in that particular post, so that there are lots of different identities that were shown in that post, so that people could say, well, I identify with so-and-so, or I identify with this person. And it's also really intentional because that the actual donor that you're featuring feels really, really honored that they get to be a part of this YW story or your organization's story. So again, I really like that tactic. Feel free to steal it. It's a great one, because also you get to talk to your donors. You also want to be relevant. So I talked about how we have the small biz map, and we talked about Black Philanthropy Month in the month of August. We often think about what's going on in current events, and we will make sure our newsletter reflects that, or our social media posts are reflecting that. You don't want to be talking about Christmas when, well, I mean, some people like to talk about Christmas in July. I don't. But you don't want to be talking about Christmas and it's, the 4th of July. It's not really going to make sense. So your people who are looking at this are gonna be like, why are they talking about Christmas right now? Or even maybe you don't want to be talking about Hanukkah while, or not Hanukkah, yeah, Hanukkah, while you're talking about Christmas, or like, yeah, they're happening at the same time, but maybe you want to separate them. There are lots of different ways that you could be relevant and intentional about your communications with your donors, and just know what's going on. You don't want someone to go on your social media or go to your blog post and see that you're still talking about something that happened a year ago, and you're not talking about things that are happening currently. And so you just want to continue to remain relevant. Yeah, you could circle back, like things are cyclical. You can, remind people that this happened a year ago, but you also want to make sure that you're talking about what's going on now and how it's relevant to your organization. I once talked to somebody who was working in the homelessness population, and she was like, "Oh, we don't talk about what's going on Mass Ave ever." And I was like, that seems a little odd if you work in homelessness and you're not going to talk about what's going on Mass Ave, because that is top of mind for most people who think about homelessness. So again, just be relevant and think about what's going on locally, nationally, that is relevant to your organization and its mission. You also want to be clear. You don't want people to have to decipher what you're trying to get. Like, if this is something that is if you're sending something out and it is a solicitation, you don't want for folks to be like, so why did they send this in the mail? Are they asking me for money right now? Or are they just saying thank you? You want to be very clear, because if you are sending something out and it's meant to be a thank you, and it's not clearly meant to be a thank you, and then a couple weeks later you send out something that is in fact a solicitation, they're gonna be like, well, didn't you just ask me for money like a couple weeks ago? Shouldn't you space this out a little bit more? And then, it's going to be very confusing for people. So you want to be clear about what your intentions are with your piece. So if it's a thank you, make sure you're saying thank you in the first like 2 sentences of the piece. If it's a solicitation, make sure within that first like 2 sentences to a paragraph, they know it's a solicitation. You want it to be clear. You don't want any confusion, because you also want it to be easy for folks. You don't want folks to have to do too much deciphering. Most people want to understand in like the first couple sentences of a piece of mail or an email what they're reading. We have short attention spans. I know I do. I will skim through an email and then go back to it later and say, well, what do I really need out of this email? So be clear, and do things to help make things clear. Maybe you need to bold text in an email. Maybe in a phone conversation, you stay upfront, like, I'm here because I want to just say thank you, or I'm here because I know around this time last year you made a gift to my organization, or you suggested that we talk to this person. I would love if you could do that again and we can have a conversation about who we should be talking to. Say that in the first couple of sentences so they know that, like, they know what they're in for and they can be prepared. The next thing you want to do is you want to be very deliberate. You want to make sure that, that's kind of close to being very clear, but you want to know that you are going to segment this particular population of your constituents, and you want to talk to them about this particular thing. At YW, we have lots of different pockets of people because we have multiple programs. We have people who haven't participated in our programs. We have people who only go to YW events. And so we are very deliberate in segmenting and using segmentation so that we can have those conversations with people and tailor it to those pockets of people so that it feels very personal. Even though you're sending out a mass email, you can make it personal. Some of my favorite mass emails are the ones where they make sure that my name is spread throughout the actual email. So they'll, like, obviously in the greeting, but also they'll a few lines down, it's like, Dominique, you really need to pay attention here. Because then anytime I see my name, I'm like, ooh, what's going on? Like, but you can only do that if you're being really deliberate and you know who it's going to be in that, like, pocket of people that you're going to send this email out to. If you're sending an email out to your entire listserv or your entire email list, you have to be more general. And so in being able to segment, you're able to be more deliberate, and then you can do things that make it more personal. The other thing is you have to be very specific, because you don't want to talk in stereotypes, like I said before. So if you are being specific, you can really talk to what the particular things that are going on in the community that you're partnering with. So you, instead of saying this particular community has this thing and this thing, and they're all stereotypes, you could say, well, this happened at this point and this day, and this is how it affected the community. And this is why we're coming to talk to you, as opposed to saying, these are the things that always happen in the community. There's always a shooting in the community. There's always, robberies that are happening in the community. No, you want to be specific and say, hey, this happened to our community. This is how we're trying to, and this is when it happened. You don't want to be very general because that gets you over into that stereotype lane, but you want to be very specific and say, hey, this is what's going on, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is when we're going to do it. Because then if someone who is from that community you're partnering, it sees that, it seems actionable to them, and less of like, woe is me, this community needs help. It's based in action when you're being very specific, or at least it should be. Sometimes it can't be, but if you are specific and lead with action, it will make everyone know that you're being actionable, and people will feel better. And then you also want to use strength-based language. So I talked about that in the things to avoid centering pity in your communications or in your conversations with your donors. The exact opposite of that is using strength-based language. So instead of saying, well, this community doesn't have the resources to do this or this, talk about what they do have and talk about how with your support, there's only so much more that can happen in this community. Like there are lots of good things that are going on. We don't have to always talk about the negative. It's not fun. Like as a fundraiser, I don't enjoy having to constantly say, well, these are all the bad things that are happening about this particular community, or this is what's happening over here and it's so terrible. I want to talk about the good things too. And quite frankly, people want to hear about the good too. And I think for a long time, there was this narrative of, well, people only give to things that are going to be like, oh my God, woe is me, tear-jerking moments. No, I have had plenty of donors that have been like, wow, it's so great that they already have so much more and we can help in making sure that they can continue to do that and more. Because there's already so much good that's happening. We want more good. So using strength-based language helps do that. And honestly, it just makes your job a lot more fun. I'm not gonna lie to you. I use strength-based language because I'm tired of having to do the woe is me thing. So if you don't want to do the woe is me thing, use strength-based language. And I will share these slides with you all because obviously there's a lot of information on this slide, but I will just go through one of these examples so that you have a better sense of what deficit-based language is versus what strength-based language or asset-based language is. It goes by many different names, but at the end of the day, it's making sure that you're not focusing on the deficit. So for this organization, Step Up, a deficit way of talking about what they were doing is Step Up addresses girls' barriers to success. So they don't have a chance of being successful. There's barriers. There's nothing there. As opposed to if you use strength-based language or asset-based language, it's in Step Up, girls set goals. In Step Up, teens sharpen their problem-solving skills. That's very specific. That's very clear on what they're doing and how this organization is helping them do something in addition to what they already have going on. Yeah, there might be things that are going on in the community that could be a barrier, but that doesn't describe that particular person or the constituents that you're working with. That doesn't describe their entire being. They're more than just that barrier. And so in using girls set goals or teens sharpen their problem solving skills, you're letting the folks know that they are more than just these barriers, but they're also going to do these things. So again, there are lots of different examples using this Step Up organization. I will share the slides so you don't have to try and scribble all of these down now. I've been in many of presentations where I'm like, I did not get that. So I always share slides. Do not worry. So this is just more on that asset-based language. I am going to skip over this because again, you're going to get the slide and not the most appealing slide to look at, but it is very useful. But one thing that I do want to make sure I mention before we skip over going through all of these, because you will get the slides, it's that the main thing with strength-based language is that you want to concentrate on the things that are strengths for those communities that you're working with. You're all working in different communities. I assume you all have different missions. You all are in different locations. And so each community has this unique story that can be told. And there's lots of great history in every community, and you want to be able to concentrate on that so that you're not only focused on the bad that's happening. Because I'm sure the folks that are living in that community hear the bad all the time, but they want to hear an organization talk about the good that already exists and the rich history that's already there, as opposed to the bad. And then there are people who may have grown up in these communities that, you know, have moved on, and they'll come back and say, well, I really like how you're talking about my or my community. So I want to help with your fundraising story. Um, I want to be a part of your organization. They can give. They maybe work at an organization that has great corporate social responsibility, a great corporate social responsibility program, and so they want to connect you with those people. You want to just be mindful of those things, and you never know who's reading your information that you're putting out there. So concentrating on the strengths of a community as opposed to the deficits is a win-win for everybody, and makes people who might want to join the conversation just feel a little bit better. Because even someone who may not be from the particular community that you're partnering with, but from a different state and it's from a community with a similar story, they're not going to like, oh yeah, I love that you're talking about this community that's very similar to the community I grew up in this way. So you just want to be mindful of things like that. And you do that by, again, drawing on emotion without stereotyping, avoiding the poverty porn or the poverty tour stop. You just like, it's not giving, y'all. It's just not giving. It's like making sure that they see that this is a sad community. It doesn't hit the same anymore. So please stop doing it. If there is one thing that you take away from this, it's please stop the poverty tours and poverty porn. It makes me cringe, and I know it makes a lot of other people cringe, and I'm sure you probably cringe as well. So if there is something that you go back to your board or your executive director and say, tell them that you don't want to do the poverty tours, and I will feel like my job is done today because I just hate them. So I'm going to talk about why you want to use inclusive fundraising practices, because you probably are going to need to go and make a case to your board or your executive director, like I said, on why you need to stop the poverty tour stops. Because again, I'm very adamant, if there's one thing you take away from this today, it's that. But I'm going to give you some reasons so that you can go to your board and say, hey, we should do this, and this is why. So in shifting towards a more inclusive fundraising practice, you're going to connect and address the needs of the community, connect with your community and address their needs a lot better. So you're going to be able to have conversations with the community that you're partnering with and really understand what's going on in the community so that you can then make a case for your work to your donors, as opposed to if you're going to, continue that poverty tour route or that deficit-based language route, and that's what they're seeing. I guarantee you that you may think you have a really great reputation in your community and that they're willing to help you. You don't. You really don't. There are many a times when I worked at schools that parents have picked up an annual report and seen the language that the school was using, and are like, well, this is why I don't tell people to apply to the school. This is why I make sure that my kid is doing what he needs to do, and then we're going to leave the school as soon as we find a different school that fits our needs better. So you really want to think about how you're connecting with your community, because you want to better address their needs and really feel like you're building a partnership with them, as opposed to like you're coming in, sweeping in and saving the day. Any work that you're doing in the community should feel like a partnership, including your fundraising. It's also an opportunity to diversify and stabilize your funding stream. It is it's just so crucial that you have a diverse funding stream. You shouldn't have most of your funding coming from individuals, or you shouldn't have most of your funding coming from, grants. You want to have a diverse funding stream for multiple reasons, because at any second, somebody can pull out or something can happen. A great example of this is I worked at a school. Again, I worked at many schools. It was calling me. Education is important, y'all. But so I worked at a school and they had one donor, and it was an individual donor, and she was funding a good chunk of the school. Like, she was super affluent, old oil money from the South and moved up to the North. And so she was giving at least a third of the school's operating budget. And they focused on her and her alone. And they didn't diversify. They had grants and stuff like that, but like a third of their operating budget was coming from this person. She passed away, and rest her soul. But she passed away and they did not have a planned gift from her. And they had a very rough few years, the first couple years after her passing. And because they didn't do this work in making sure that they were able to seize opportunities to diversify their funding streams, they didn't have a super great relationship in the community that they were partnering with. A lot of the people who are local to the neighborhood the school was in had this really bad taste in their mouth for the school because of how they talked about the girls that went to the school. It was an all-girls school. And so they had to do a lot of repairing of relationships in the community so that they could then diversify and bring some of the funding or their fundraising locally, because there are people who are like, I would give to this school, but I don't like how you talk about your students. So you really want to make sure that you're creating an opportunity to have a diverse funding stream, because you don't want to rely solely on individuals, and you don't want to rely solely on grants, and you don't want to rely solely on corporate social responsibility. Things change, people pass in this case. So you want to make sure that you are ready to bring anyone into that conversation. You also want to do this because it's going to just align with your mission more. And that should be enough of a case, but often it's not, because again, fundraising is very antiquated and there are lots of reasons why people go to these galas and they want to use paddles and do auctions and things like that. And I hate an auction, just naming that. But nonetheless, if you move into a more inclusive fundraising practice, you're going to be able to say, well, in doing this, we are able to, one, bring in more people from the community to our funding conversation, and they can talk about what is actually needed. You can talk about how you are going to be able to, have people from the community feel empowered to give to your organization. There are lots of ways that this is going to align with your mission, but also it's just good for business. Being more inclusive is always going to be good for whatever you're trying to do, because you're going to have more people who are going to be interested in your work, and more people who understand your work, who are out of the conversation before, are going to be able to join in on the conversation. So you should lead there. I didn't lead there, because then you'd be like, well, then why are you telling me all the other reasons why we should use inclusive fundraising? The other reasons are important too, but you should always lead with, it's just going to be better aligned with your mission and the work that you're doing. So now we're gonna go back to talking about the barriers. So we talked a little bit about capacity and things like that, but there are lots of other barriers, like I said, that we didn't talk about. There's the scarcity mindset. And so I think that oftentimes when folks go to their board and they say that they want to switch it up and they want to, use a more inclusive fundraising practice, or they want to try and do something a little bit more innovative, instantly your board is like, well, there's not a lot of money out there. There's not a lot of wiggle room for us to try something new. We need to do things that we know are tested and proven to work, because we can't risk us not getting the money. And that's a terrible reason not to try. With everything, there's going to be a risk. And so even in staying in our more antiquated practice, there is going to be a risk, because there are lots of organizations who are dabbling in corporate social responsibility that are asking about your inclusive fundraising practices and asking about what your board looks like or what your donor base looks like, and asking about buy-in from the community. And so if you're not doing things that are inclusive with your fundraising and your communications, you're not going to have very much to say when a corporate partner or an individual comes to you and says, well, what does your board look like? Or what does your donor population look like? And then you stayed in this antiquated mindset, but now you're not getting dollars too from this particular corporate partner or this particular individual. So that scarcity mindset should not stop you, because no matter what, anything is going to be a risk. And some risks are worth taking. I think that a lot of the time, nonprofits are like, we can't be risky. We need to stay with what we know. And even in starting your nonprofit, no matter how long your nonprofit has been around, that was a risk, because no one knew that your nonprofit was going to like take off and be great. And now you're here and you're doing it for, in YW's case, 150 years. In other cases, maybe you've been around for 20, but that was still a risk. The other big one is white saviorism. I think that in general, the nonprofit sector is just like, well, there's this white savior complex and we can't move away from it. But we can. We truly can. It's not doing anything for us, y'all. It besides creating a divide between the community you're partnering with and the people who are part of your funding story. And there should be no divide. Everyone should be able to come to your funding table and have a chance to say what they need to say. And also, that's just not aligning with your mission. Like, you shouldn't want to be the white savior. You should be wanting to empower whatever community you're partnering with. So again, when I said that when you're going to your board and you want to go to them and say that it's just going to align with your mission better, this is what I mean. In not having inclusive fundraising practices and not using inclusive communication practices, you're not going to be empowering the community that you're partnering with. So then the other thing that you might have as a barrier is the idea that the nonprofit sector and the people who support the nonprofit sector are well-intended. And like, yeah, we should all be well-intended, but just because we're well-intended doesn't mean that there isn't malice in our actions. And so, yes, we can be well-intended, and yes, we could make a donation because we want to, support good work, but you could be doing it in a way that is, alienating a community, making a community feel small. And that's not helpful to your mission, because again, you're going in to empower a community, and yet you're alienating and making a community feel small because you have these well-intended people who think they're doing the right thing and they're not truly in partnership and having conversation with the community that you're partnering with. So don't let well-intention be the thing that drives you into, well, we don't need inclusive fundraising, because it can harm your fundraising as well. So you're probably like, well, that's a lot of stuff. So what should I do right now? Like what's the first step that I should take in making this happen? Well, like I said, you can create a list of words that are going to help your organization understand what it is that they shouldn't be saying or that is deficit based, and have that be like a part of your communications toolkit. We're going to commit to not using these words in all of our communications, both internally and externally, so that we're not alienating pockets of people. That's a very easy thing to do. And it will do wonders for you, because it'll also make fundraising fun again, if it's not fun for you already. So that's one of the first things I always suggest that people do when it comes to thinking about inclusive fundraising practices. Create that list of words. The other thing is you want to schedule some sort of like audit of your donor facing content. And I think that you should really do this quite often. I, at one organization, had done it a couple times a year. So we would do it at the end of every quarter. We would audit all the communications that we sent out, so that we had a sense of, did anything fall through the cracks? Did we slip a word in there that was on our list of words that we wouldn't use? Did we say something that like didn't sit well with us, and talk about why it didn't sit well with us, so that you know what to improve in the next quarter, because you're constantly going to want to improve. We're not perfect, things happen, but if you have a sense of what you've done and how you're going to move on from it, you'll be okay. Yes, it'll suck that you put out that word in your donor facing communications, or maybe like this one thing didn't sit well with you. Yes, it will suck in that moment, but in taking the time to audit and really think through how to do it better the next quarter or the next time around is going to do wonders for you. Those are the two things that you can do right now. But also, how can I put it into practice just in general in my day-to-day? Yes, I told you to create that list, but also just in general in your day-to-day, consider the language that you're using internally and externally, and making sure that the words on that list that you create are not being used. I think that oftentimes it's very easy to make a list of words that you're like, I'm not going to use these words. They aren't on brand for us. They don't align with us mission wise, but then they still happen. You could still say them. And I'm not saying that you need to like go around publicly shaming people who are using them internally, but you need to really make it a practice that internally that those aren't used, so that then when it comes to your organization speaking externally, it's not so hard to be like, oh, I don't use that word. The other thing is you want to avoid creating that sense of pity, like I said before. So yes, if you're an organization that works with youth and you're having people come in for tours, yes, you can, have the students do the tours. No, don't make them change their clothes because their shirt is dirty or they don't look presentable. Don't do that. It's not fun for the student. And I don't know why that would be fun for you. So don't do that. That's just one way that you could create a sense of pity or charity, but there are many other ways, and just don't do it. I don't know why anyone would want to, but again, if you're going to do something and it's going to make the community you're partnering with feel bad, likely it's not an inclusive practice. And then you want to be intentional with how you're recruiting people to be donors, or how you're recruiting people to be on a committee, and how you're recruiting people to be on your board, how you're branching out to create partnerships with people, how you're staffing your team. All these things are going to contribute to making sure that you're able to have inclusive practices with your organization, within your organization, that will then trickle out externally. You're not, if you're going to have a team and it's going to be like all white men, you're missing a lot of different identities from that conversation. And then you're kind of stuck with like, oh, well, this is how they view it, and we don't have any other opinions. You also don't want to have all Black women, or you don't want to have all, you want to make sure that you're bringing in all the different identities that you possibly can. Obviously, you're not there. It's going to be hard to make sure you check off every box, and you don't want to make it feel like you're checking off a box to fill a quota, but you want to be intentional about how you're staffing and recruiting so that those conversations can be rich when it's time to have conversations around fundraising practices. So with that being said, questions, comments, concerns. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can actually see you all, because I would like to see you all as we have a conversation. I can also bring the slides back up if you have a question about a particular slide. And you don't have to like raise your hand, you can just unmute. I must have done a really great job because you have no questions. Wow. I'm impressed with myself. Okay, go ahead, Jacqueline. You're muted. Oh, they can't unmute. I see. Well, then put it in the chat. I will wait for you to put it in the chat. I am sorry, I did not know y'all couldn't unmute.
I think he just undid it. I think I can you hear me?
You're still muted.
Oh.
Oh, wait, no, you're not muted.
Oh, okay. All right. I have a really sensitive question.
Yeah.
So when you spoke about, let me start with this. I'm from Code Connect. We work in Brockton. We bring STEM education to youth.
Mhm.
We focus on kindergarten all the way through high school.
Mhm.
We had a summer camp this summer. And when you said, try to speak about specifics, try not to engage in stereotypes. And one of the things that we want to confront at Code Connect is racism in STEM.
Mhm.
And we had a summer camp this summer where we had a primarily African-American group of boys in our summer camp. And one of them was called the N-word at one of the major events that we had joined to work with. And it was so traumatic, the whole experience of it. But then I'm thinking like, is that what you mean? You want me to highlight that kind of an incident when you say don't engage in a stereotype like racism in STEM?
So that's hard because in that particular incident, you could also be re-traumatizing the student.
Okay.
And so I think that you have to find a delicate balance of talking about the incident, but also making sure that the student, especially because this is a student,
Right.
I'm very like sensitive to the fact that like children often they don't get the chance to like speak for themselves when it comes to how their stories are being told in fundraising, because they're like, oh, this is a school, like
Right.
your parents signed off. So you want to be, you do want to talk about that, but you could talk about the implications that it had on the camp. Like I'm sure that afterwards there are lots of things that needed to happen in order to ensure the safety and make sure the students were just okay.
Right.
So you could talk about that, but being specific and being like, well, a student was called the N-word. Yeah, name it. You can name it, but also name it in a way that's not going to be re-traumatizing for the student. It's the same way that like when, so everyone in the chat, Dominique from Lenny's Aiken Fund can unmute you upon request. So if you would like to ask a question out loud, just message her or say in the chat. But we don't go around saying that like, well, so-and-so was, if somebody is murdered, right? And so we, like, in all the instances of police brutality, like, I make sure to name that they were murdered, not that they were killed by a cop, they were murdered. And this is the same thing, like, this happened, you should name that it happened, but you also just need to make sure that you're, one, protecting the child.
Right.
So obviously don't use their name. And talk about the impact. I think that that's the thing that's really going to, like, make sure that you're not, like, bringing pity onto that particular child or all the students at the particular camp that it happened at, or I don't know if it's all the camps or what the exact situation, but, like, you don't want it to be that you're going in and saying, well, this happened and woe is me. Like, the kids were so, like, no, you want to say, this was the impact. This is why we're doing this work, because it had this impact on them. And we don't want this to stop them from thinking that they have a spot in STEM.
That's right. Yeah. Okay.
Also, I'm very sorry that happened at your
I
camp.
know. I want to be clear. It was someone outside of our organization that spoke to our kids that way.
Yeah, I'm still very sorry that happened.
Thank you.
I going to try. Archana wants to be unmuted. And if I butchered your name, just tell me.
Hi. No, you didn't butcher my name.
Yeah,
It was almost good pronunciation. Thank you. And this has been a wonderful seminar today. By the way, my name is Archana, and I recently joined as an HR coordinator at an NGO called St. Mark Community Education Program in Dorchester. So I'm a novice at fundraising, and like some of them over here, and I would like to help my executive director in a fundraising campaign that they are planning to host sometime spring next year. So actually our NGO focuses on supporting immigrants and people of different culture and background, etc., by providing citizenship classes and ESOL classes, conversational classes, etc. So when you mention inclusivity, I could see that we have come a long way in terms of student registration, etc. But when it comes to either volunteers or donors, it has been really hard to get that inclusive environment, even though we are focusing on immigrants, which is widely increasing in the US. So how do you think, or what are the what advice would you provide me if we were to focus on bringing more inclusive donors? And because this has not been a frequent fundraising event that has been, I mean, St. Mark has not conducted many fundraising events. They have just conducted only one, and there has been a little success in there. So how do you think, or how advanced do you think that we need to start planning? Because there is a lot of content that you covered today, and to take in that content and try to make the fundraising event more successful than the previous one would be challenging, but I would like to get your advice on that.
Yeah. Well, first, I want to applaud you on being an HR person who wants to take a step into fundraising. I think that, I didn't say this, but I often say this in presentation. I think that everyone at your organization, no matter their role, is a fundraiser. And so you taking a step in supporting your organization and trying to build a more inclusive fundraising practice and just fundraising in general is great. I love that. In terms of, trying to bring in more diverse donors into your event, there are a couple of things that I would suggest. I would suggest that you think about what you're looking for in terms of diversity, because again, diversity can look like many different things. There's racial diversity, there's diversity of how you identify in terms of gender, there's diversity in how you identify in terms of who you choose to have as your partner. So there are lots of different ways that you can find diversity. So one, you need to name like what you are in particularly looking for in diversity and set a goal around that. And then the other piece of it is, if you don't have a history of being in community with people who identify that way, in terms of whatever diversity your goal is to achieve in your event, you're going to need to look into partnerships, or you're going to need to look internally at who has been in community with those people, so that you can lean on them and create mutually beneficial opportunities for you to partner with them and bring in that community to your event. You can't just like throw an event out there and think, oh yeah, I want diversity, they will come. You're going to need to build that reputation. And in order to build that reputation so that people will come, you're going to probably have to look into partnerships, especially within the community of, you said you're in Dorchester, right?
Yeah.
So look in Dorchester, maybe there are groups that you can partner with, or maybe there are community organizations that, you know, have events that are targeted to that particular demographic that you want to bring in. So I think that there, like before, it was like we knew as fundraisers that we needed to go out and find the people that we wanted to be our donors, right? So it was like, yeah, I'm gonna go out to this like high society event back in the like old age, and you know, I would go and find my big donor, right? You still have to do that, but you have to think about your goals and then find those events. And there are lots of events that are lots of partnerships that you can create that can bring you that particular demographic. So lean on community.
Sounds good. Thank you.
No problem. All right. And then I see this question in the chat. How can I tackle something like being the only BIPOC founded and managed organization in a predominantly white neighborhood that has a strong history with racism without it becoming a pity? That is a great question. I think that the big thing is that even though it's a predominantly white neighborhood and has a strong history of racism, I'm sure there is also some history that you can lean on that can help support why your organization needs to exist in that particular community. And I would lean on that for sure. In addition to leaning on because with any community that like is like, oh, we're deep tied to our history, you got to combat history with history. I know something probably exists. I don't know what community it is that you're in. I'm Boston born and raised, so I probably could find something. If I knew what community, feel free to message me outside of this. And we could talk all of the, oh yeah, girl, I know lots about Southie. We could talk. But in addition to that, I think that also just talking about the importance of bringing in diversity into a community is also going to be really, really important, especially in Southie, as you know, businesses continue to pop up, things continue to happen in Southie, and they don't have a great reputation. And you can speak to how your organization can combat the reputation that exists in South. I really feel for you, because Southie is hard, because they really do love their history, but there's also history that can combat. So I would really lean into the history, but also just talk about the importance of and value of the diversity that your organization brings to the community. And hope that selfie, gets better. Yeah. Eric, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, I need to I have a book. And I'm gonna go and look in my library for the title of the book on the history of Black and Brown selfie, but I will find that title for you. So just I'm sure my email is somewhere in the world, or LinkedIn. Find me. Let's see. Our nonprofit is a community mental health practice. Do you have any suggestions for creating a donor base? Everyone is talking about mental health, but few set up to donate and support us. Yes, mental health is a big talking point now. And I think the big thing with it being mental health having a moment is to just get out there and create awareness. I think that because it's having a moment, everybody is talking about mental health within whatever field they're in. You could be in tech and you're talking about mental health. So it's going to be hard to break through and create awareness for an organization that's all you're talking about is mental health, as opposed to an organization that's talking about tech and mental health or whatever. And that's not a shot at any other organization that wants to talk about mental health. Everyone should talk about mental health. But if you're specifically that is what your organization does exclusively, you're going to need to build a lot of awareness and talk about the different ways that you are making an impact in partnering. I think partnerships are going to be really, really important for your organization. If you already have existing partnerships, highlight those. Because that's going to help bringing awareness to your organization. And then once you start to bring that awareness, then you can go through that I'm going to, convert them into longtime donors, but also I'm going to engage with them. Don't try and convert them before you engage. So go through all of the steps, but so you want to attract them and, make sure that you create a space for your organization. You can do that through partnerships. And then once you do that, you start that engagement process. And maybe it's that you set up an email package that goes out every 2 weeks for anyone new to your system, like a welcome email. It could be that you have a board member host a new to, what is your organization's name? New to neighborhood counseling community event. It doesn't have to be anything where you're asking for money, but you're creating community and engaging with them. And then that's going to lead to the conversion into a longtime donor. I'll answer one more question because it's the last one in there. And I think we're at time. I don't know. I think we're at time, right? Dominique or what, Eric?
Yes, we are.
Okay, I'll answer this last question and then we'll wrap it up. We're trying to recruit our first dedicated development/fundraising. I love this question. Women in Development has a great listserv. There's also a group called the Rooted Collaborative. They also are a really great resource in terms of finding diverse staff. They also have a listserv. AFP also is a good place to kind of network with people and find great talent. AFP is the Association of Fundraising Professionals. And also just lean in on the people that showed up to this call. I'm sure many of them are fundraisers, if not know a fundraiser. And oftentimes we just know people who are looking. I often refer people who I know in the fundraising space because I know they're looking, but they're not openly looking. So just lean in and check out those listservs. Again, that's Women in Development, Greater Boston, AFP, which is the Association of Fundraising Professionals, there is a Massachusetts chapter. And then the Rooted Collaborative is that is more national, international actually. But they do have a listserv and people check it out. Also, just remembered another one, the African American Development Officers group. They also have a listserv that they like break down by region. And so you can throw things on there too. And they have a great diverse pool of talent as well. So I don't have those links ready, so I would drop them, but they're easy to find.
Well, thank you, Dominique, so much. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in short time. So again, everyone have a great weekend, and we'll see you at the next seminar.
Bye,
Take
everyone.
care.
Bye. Thank you so much.
No problem.